Hello, I'm David Morris. I'm here with Ruth Blakely and Stephen Caneen. We've just had a delicious dinner and we've been talking about our family histories and our backgrounds because as Australians, of course, we all come from somewhere. We either migrated here 50, 60, 70,000 years ago if we're Indigenous, or most of us, our ancestors migrated here perhaps 200, perhaps 100, or perhaps 10 years ago. And so we've been talking about our experiences, and Ruth and I are actually related because my grandmother was Ruth's mother. I'm not sure what that makes us, but we are. It's second cousin or something like that. I don't know what the correct term is.
Yes.
But on that side, our ancestry was all German. So I'm interested to hear your memories, Ruth, as a child. How German was our family? How much did we carry, do you think, the culture from Germany, or had we started to lose some of it by the time of your childhood? I know by my generation, which is the next one after yours, I really didn't feel very German at all. So I'm interested to know your experience.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because I don't think about it very much. But when I was small, I suppose 2 is the youngest memory that I have. But my grandfather, who was a German ancestry, he was a German music teacher, and he lived with us in our house in Artarmon. And we actually had a veranda at the back, which was divided into 2 parts. And I had a small part as a very small child next to him. And in the morning, I would wake up and he would say, good morning. And I would say, hast du deine Hosen on? And it was like, are you dressed? And so that was that's ridiculous that I remember that so strongly. And then and I must have spent most of the day with him because he had a zither, which he played on the front veranda. And I can remember vividly the zither being played. And he was a very handsome man, a bit like David, but anyway, he was. But I think it must have followed along in the family, that line of genealogy. But that's my main memory of him. And then the family was Frida, who was Elfrida, who was the oldest in the family, and then there was Dorothea, and then there was my mother, who was Emily Margarita with an IE on the end of it. And but before that there was Jeff, the oldest in the family, and he was Herman Gottfried. So they all had German names, and we would, I specifically remember Christmas time because we would go to Frida's house and she had the German Christmas tree, and on the German Christmas tree were all these amazing glass baubles that I used to spend hours just looking at because they were so beautiful. And there were some musical ones, and you couldn't buy that sort of thing in Australia anymore. So at that time, so that's my main memory of being of German ancestry, which of course David wouldn't have at all, not at all. Yeah. So,
and several of the family returned to Germany, so had some contact with Germany directly, right? So
I think so. I don't remember that.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, yes, I don't remember, because I was 8 years younger than my sister.
Yes.
So I was by far the youngest in the family. And then, so John, your uncle, was, John and Peter were more probably my age. John was the next cousin to me.
Yes.
So Peter's younger brother.
But they all spoke some German as well,
did.
right?
Yeah,
so my father and my uncle
they all played musical instruments too. So we would have musical evenings, and the zither was played, the piano was played. Peter played the flute.
Yes.
I don't think John and I were much good because I don't think we played anything.
But I remember the last time that you and John, because we've lost John sadly, but the last time you and John met in my presence anyway, the two of you started singing German nursery songs.
Yes,
which was beautiful.
Because we remember them. It's funny, isn't it? It just comes back into your head.
Yeah.
And I think we had probably a lot in common because we were the youngest, and because at that stage we lived in Sydney. So so I had more to do with John.
And so Emily Margarita, your mother,
my
who's the sister of my grandmother Blanche.
Yes.
We knew her as Peggy. So
You did.
why was that? Why in that generation, and perhaps still today, why is it that migrants and children of migrants take on more English-sounding names? I mean, do you know the reason why?
I think
we
it
knew her?
was schooling. I'm sure she said Margaret was, or Peggy became a shortened version of Margaret, and it was nicer at school for her to have Peggy than to have Emily with an IE on the end of it, which is probably fine now.
Isn't that interesting?
But
These days
then-
we're more multicultural.
Yes, now it would be absolutely fine. Yes,
Very interesting,
yes.
isn't it? Steve, your ancestry is Irish, on the other hand, isn't it?
Well, it's complicated.
Yeah.
My great-grandfather was Michael Cuneen from County Clare, who came out here in about the 1850s. And he settled in Ballarat, Bendigo, and then went coal mining, and then eventually my grandfather Tom was born, and Tom became a selector and took up land and that sort of came up. But on my mother's side, my grandfather on my mother's side was Ballychisholm from the middle of Edinburgh.
Very Scottish.
Scottish name, but he married a girl whose ancestry goes back to the Third Fleet. And she was who was a convict on the Third Fleet. So it was very complicated. So I got English on one side, Scottish and Irish in the whole situation. It's a very complicated.
But actually, that complicated background is pretty typical, isn't it?
It is very typical. Yeah. Sam Thorley came out in the Third Fleet. He was found with burglaring tools, and he said, "Who, me?" sort of thing. What do you mean? So anyway, he got 7 years transportation, and he came out on a vessel called the Active on the Third Fleet. And he did well, became very, very prosperous, and served his time, and then and became very, very wealthy, and so he settled down, and that was great as part of that situation. But on the Irish side of things, as I say, Michael Cuneen came out in about the 1850s, but we don't know how he arrived, because we think he came out under the name of John Smith, jumped ship, and suddenly became Michael Cuneen, and then brought his father out from County Clare. And I've been back to County Clare, and I've found the Irish graves in County Clare from the Cuneen family. So that's lovely. But then we all settled down and became part of the Australian culture.
Yes.
And my grandfather then took up land up at a place called Boggabilla, which is on the Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria border. And he was up there, and he walked off the land. In the big drought of 1905-6, there was a massive drought. Banks failed. Australia was in a lot of problems, and he walked off. And he loaded his wife and surviving child, my auntie Nell, and he drove south from Boggabilla, which is on the Queensland border, and he ended up in Gunnedah. So this here in Tamworth, which is 80-odd k's from Gunnedah, is part of my heritage.
Wonderful.
And I've actually been over to Gunnedah, found the places where he's been to, and been out to because I was at one stage ago, I was a rural manager in the ANZ Bank, and I went to properties, and sometimes the hair on the back of my neck would stand up, and I thought, am I in Grandpa's territory?
Yes, absolutely.
So there we go. So it's a lovely situation.
Thank you so much to both of you. That's beautiful to hear your stories. It's really meaningful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.